Hey guys, welcome back. I have another book review for you today, and the book that I read this week is called Waco, a Survivor Story. It's by David Thibodeau. It was originally published in 1999 as A Place Called Waco, and it was republished in 2018 as a paperback edition with a new epilogue, and it's just titled Waco, a Survivor Story. So this book has 3.69 stars on Goodreads, and I am gonna give it 2 stars. So I'm gonna tell you a little bit about why I did not like this book. So last week, I told you that I will not usually read a book that I don't like. I will stop reading it, and that's for 2 reasons. I think that it's a waste of time to read something that I don't like, that I don't have to read, and also I don't like giving books low ratings, especially nonfiction books. I really don't like to give those like low ratings because I don't want to make it seem like I don't sympathize with their experiences, but I just didn't like this book. And I'm going to walk you through why. And I'll even tell you a couple things that I did enjoy about it. So, this book was written by a survivor of the Waco Siege, which happened in 1993 in Waco, Texas. And it was between government forces, so we can say ATF, FBI, and a bunch of others, including like the Army, and a small group of Branch Davidians that were inside of Mount Carmel in Waco, Texas. So this was not the first time in that time period that the ATF had issues. They also had issues at Ruby Ridge, and kind of stemming from this, Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber, cited Waco and Ruby Ridge as reasons for the Oklahoma City bombing. So this is actually a pretty big event in American history. And I'm going to be honest with you, I don't think that you're going to pick up this book if you've never heard of Waco. If I had never heard of Waco, I wouldn't have picked this up. And maybe you're different, but I think most people know a little bit about it. And like I said, I just wouldn't pick this up randomly and be like, let me read about a place like called Waco. Like, no. But this book actually starts out, the prologue is about the actual events on April 19th, 1993. And then we kind of go back in time and we walk through David Thibodeau's life up until he meets David Koresh. And that first part of the book reads really well. You can read it quickly, it's not bad. But then he meets David Koresh and he goes down to Waco, Texas with him. And the next 200 pages were a struggle to get through. I struggled so hard reading these next 200 pages while he's in Mount Carmel, and that's for a couple reasons. One of them being it was no longer like just his memoir, it was the life and times of David Koresh. Everything he wrote was about David. And I was like, I could have bought that book. I could have bought the book about what happened to about everything about David Koresh. I could have bought that book, but I didn't. I bought a survivor story, and I did expect to hear a little bit about Koresh, but not 200 pages of everything that he did. So then the next part after the siege also read super quickly. I sat on my bed, read that so quickly, and it wasn't an issue. But I don't like when the beginning is fast, the middle drags and feels like it takes forever, and then the ending is really fast. It bothered me. I thought there should be some continuity throughout. During the first part and a little bit during the last part, I did enjoy he would put in song lyrics because he wanted to be a drummer in a rock and roll band. So if he was going through something, that he would say, all I could think at this time was insert song lyric like on repeat. And I kind of liked that. I thought it was a fun way to do it. But he stopped doing that in the middle as well, and that frustrated me. Another thing that frustrated me, and I might insert some clips of me reading these parts that really frustrated me. You can see I like marked parts in the book that really bothered me. Okay, so I'm about 50 pages into this book, so not far at all. And this man, David Thibodeau, is just saying all of these things, and maybe it's because he has the benefit of hindsight. Maybe it's because he's misremembering, or I don't really know. But he's saying that, like, David Koresh
planned on being a martyr and also said that all of his flock would die. And this guy is like, well, he was just like one of the guys. So I, really liked him. And if I hadn't liked him, I probably wouldn't have followed him. What? Like, he told you that you were going to die like 3 years before the Waco Siege happened. This man said, like, he knew we were all going to die. He expected to be a martyr, and he expected everyone to hate him. So I'm at work reading this, and I am in the first chapter of book 2. And I just read this part, and it says, Robert confessed that even when he'd first visited us, he and his fellow agents hadn't even known that the book of Revelation was in the Bible. They live in Texas, but also I'm pretty sure that pretty much everyone knew that, even in 1993.
Now, I think that we can probably all agree that what happened at Waco was a very unnecessary tragedy. It was an excessive use of force by the American government. We're not going to get into that here. I'm not going to walk through like my opinions on that. If you really want to know, feel free to message and ask me because I'll tell you, but I'm not going to get into it in a 10-minute video. So there was a couple parts where he would talk about what was going on both sides. So on the side of the ATF and the side of the Branch Davidians. And if he was talking about the ATF or the FBI, he would say, they lied. I know they lied. This is not true. They did this wrong. Okay, but then when he was talking about David Koresh, or really any of the Branch Davidians, mostly David Koresh, it was mostly Koresh that was the issue here, he would say things like, well, I don't know, I never saw that, like, I don't think that David would do that. So he's making you biased one way or the other, even though you probably already have opinions on that. And that kind of bothered me. And there was a couple parts where he talked about some really bad things, horrible things that David Koresh did. And again, I'm not going to get too deep into that, but he would talk about these things um, and he would make excuses for Koresh, and those are not excusable issues, I don't believe. And he would just make excuses for him and be like, well, it was divinely ordained. God told him to do this. And I really wondered. But throughout, they focus a lot on the children, and they talk about how there was no child abuse happening in Mount Carmel, and all the children are well adjusted. But you have to think that anyone under the age of 18 is basically still a child. And the fact that David Koresh was marrying 12 to 14-year-old girls means that there was child abuse happening in Mount Carmel. So, this whole thing where he talks about how great this guy is wrong. And I could not get past that. That is one of the main reasons for my low rating, that he just ignored that. And he says a lot of times throughout, complacence or silence is like you agreeing with the issue. And he never said anything about it. It made me so angry. It made me so angry with this man because this was written after. That's neither here nor there. So I had a couple of issues with that. He also calls people names. I don't really think that that's the way to go about it. But in one point, he's talking about Janet Reno, who's the Attorney General at the time, and he says, well, maybe she's stupider than she looks. That's rude. Sorry, you don't need to be a bully either. And I don't want to say that I don't sympathize with what this man went through. I think that it must have been absolutely horrible. I sympathize with him, with all the other survivors, and with the people who were inside. I sympathize with them so much. But, you don't get to come out and be a bully. That's not how this works. especially if you're trying to give like a true account that's unbiased, which is what he also says in this book. I will say the 2018 epilogue does change things a little bit. He does finally condemn Koresh for what he did. And he says, you know, he's always there for the children who were able to leave Mount Carmel. You can always talk to him, and he wants them to know that they were and are still loved, and that maybe redeemed him like this much, in my opinion. But throughout, he does some pretty horrible things, in my opinion. There is a girl who testifies at one of the congressional hearings. She's a sexual assault survivor, and he says that she was lying. She was 14 years old. Like, this man is not a good person. At least at the time of his original writing, he was not a good person. In my opinion, this is all my opinion. You might read this book and you might give it 5 stars. You might absolutely love this book, but I did not. This book infuriated me. And there's some people that'll tell you if a book makes you angry, especially a nonfiction book, that they're making you feel something, that they're doing something right. And like, he made me so angry. I was so frustrated while I was reading this. I was calling my mom to complain about it. I was texting my friends, and I was like, I'm so angry. I am angry for multiple reasons, but those are the main reasons in this particular book that I could not rate it higher than I did, especially him like brushing off all of these assaults and everything. I could not, in good conscience, rate this higher than I did, even if it had been the best read that I've read. It was not. But if it had been, I couldn't have rated it higher anyway. I would not feel right. I also am not going to just recommend this book. If you are interested, if you liked the TV show, so there is a show, it's on Netflix now. It came out in 2018, but it went on Netflix this year. It is called Waco. It is based on this account and a book by the FBI hostage negotiator that also worked at Waco. So it's got a little bit of both sides. I have heard that it does kind of gloss over some of the same things that this book glosses over, so you're going to need to take that with a grain of salt. But if you're interested, sure, read this book. But I'm not going to recommend it because I'm not going to recommend that viewpoint. Even if he did change his tune a little bit, it was 18 years later. He could have changed some of the wording, I think, in his main book here to make it sound like he didn't blindly agree with everything, and to also not make it so much of the story of David Koresh. But yes, like I said, the first 50 pages or so, you can see I don't really have too many marks there, were fine. The end of it was fine. The middle drug for me. It was like very monotonous. It was very bleak inside of Mount Carmel. He was very bored. He was quite whiny. I mean, in all fairness, he was like 24 years old when he was there, but he just complains about how hot Texas is and how cold Texas is and how there's fire ants in Texas. And I will say, as someone who has been to Waco, Texas, they call it a town. I'm not sure what the size of Waco was in the early 90s, but I've been to Waco a couple times, and Waco is most definitely a city. They call it a town, so maybe it was smaller, or maybe it's just like he calls it a town because it's smaller than LA. I don't know. But Texas is hot. I think most people know that. It also gets cold in the winter. I think most people know that. So, like, his incessant whining about the temperature in Texas did get a little bit old. But this is his account. I am no one to judge his personal feelings on a matter. I just did not agree with a lot of the things that he was saying in 1999. So I would say keep in mind that 1999 was only 6 years after this happened. So wounds could still be quite fresh. The congressional hearings, I think, were still happening then, or the FBI's investigation was still happening then. That didn't even wrap up until 2000. So if this is something that you're interested in, sure, read it. But like, I'm not going to like, say you're gonna love this book, because I did not love this book. But I will be back next week, guys, hopefully with a better rating. I do hate to rate books badly because I know how hard authors work to write them, and I know that writing about a tragedy that occurred in your life has to be terrible. But I just, in good conscience, can't rate this book higher than I did. But I will be back next week. I will try to pick a happier book and a book that I'm able to rate higher. And that's all I have for you today. I will see you guys next week.